Hello everyone, welcome to a new video. My name is Jamil. I am going to be solving a leet code for you here today. As I mentioned earlier, I am taking a new approach where I do a problem outside of filming time to try and understand what's going on. Then I come back to you here to let you know how I approached it, share my ideas with you and share my thought processes, and hopefully to help you guys learn something here today. So I'm going to be taking a little bit of a different approach again with this question because this question is a linked list problem and I don't think I have filmed one just yet. So allow me to step into this problem and tell you how I plan on solving it. I'm going to quickly start off by reading the question and then doing a quick demonstration, solving it, and I guess afterwards, if you have any questions, you can leave any questions for me in the comments. I would be more than happy to address them for you. Okay, so today's problem is to convert a binary number into a linked list, to an integer. Okay, so we are given a head, which is a reference to a node which is a reference node to a singly linked list. Singly linked list means that each node only points to one new node, right? You can have a doubly linked list, but we're not doing that today. The value of each node in the linked list is either going to be 0 and 1, and the linked list holds the binary representation of a number. So that makes sense because binary only operates in 0 and 1s. Our values in the nodes will only be 0 and 1. We need to return the decimal value of the number in the linked list. So once we get our everything in the linked list figured out, we need to do one extra step and return and convert what we get out of the linked list into a number and return that. And the most significant bit, this is bolded, is at the head of the linked list. So this first one that we see in here, at the head of our list, this is the beginning of our list. When we are first stepping into our linked list, head represents 1, and head will represent 1, 0, and 1, and a value, and will have a value of 1. And that is because when you are looking at linked lists, right, nodes tell you two things. Nodes tell you their value, and they will tell you what other nodes it is connected to, right? And these are important bits of information, as stated here in the problem, right? LeetCode has a few more definitions for us this time around, and we'll go over them here in a moment, okay? The explanation for, this first example here tells us that our head represents 1, 0, and 1, right? This is the full linked list. And our output is 5. And how did we get to that, right? If we were to concatenate 1, 0, and 1, we would end up with 101, naturally, right? And that is a binary representation for the number 5. If you know how binary works, great. You'll see that, this 1 represents the value of 1, and this 1 represents the value of 4. And when you add them together, it comes up with the value of 5. So what does this here mean, right? It's giving us a class of list nodes, and it's kind of confusing for somebody who's seen that the first time around. But the class of list nodes holds a couple of things. You have, a value, which is represented as a number. You have next, which indicates the next node. It's either going to be a full-on list node or it's going to be null, right? So when you are going from 1 to 0, next is going to be a list node. From 0 to 1, next is also going to be a list node. But when you're at the end here, next is going to be null. And that is an important bit of information, and we're going to take a look at that. We're going to take a look at that in a moment, okay? And then we have our constructors. So value can be an optional parameter, because if we don't have a list node to look at, then we don't have a value, right? Next is also an optional parameter, because if there is no next node, then, it's just going to be null. It's going to be empty. So this dot value, and we use the keyword this when we are talking about the object at hand. If value is undefined, return 0. Otherwise, return the value, right? So value will only be undefined when you don't have a list node, right? Or if the list node is empty. And it should return 0. That is not to be confused with 0 being an empty value, because 0 in this node is the value of the node, even though really 0 doesn't have any value, right? It's 0. But Next is not undefined. Next is 0, right? So when you are at 1, when you're at this list node, this very first list node, next is not undefined. It is not null. It will be next. It is a valid argument. You can step into this node and extract the value out of it. So undefined and null are very important distinctions here, because next here is technically not undefined. It is null, but we can, like, adding 0 to 1 just ends up with being 1 rather than being, you know, the node does not exist. And that is a slight difference. But first, let's see what we are passed here. Okay, so we are going to be passed a full linked list with binary with numbers representing a binary value, right? Perfect. And what do we need to return? We need to return a number that converts the binary representation into an integer value. Integer value, I'm going to say integer even though it says decimal value here, so it could actually be a float. But I mean, if you know, well, I'm just going to put value, but if you know a little bit about binary, I mean, I don't really know if there are any cases that convert binary into decimal values. If you do, let me know in the comments below. I'd be happy to learn. But I think this is still a little bit confusing. So let me see what I can do in terms of trying to clarify this a little better. I'm gonna cut this list out. I'm going to place it here, and then I am going to bring this over this way and make this a little bigger. And I'm going to try and explain to you my process of how I am going to approach this problem. All right. We need to get 1, 0, and 1 out of the linked list. Okay. Usually when you start off with a linked list, you're either going to be outside of the list or starting at the first node. In this example, we are going to be starting at the first node, which represents 1. Okay. So if I console log head here, I'm also going to have to return the number 1 just because in TypeScript, this function is expecting us to return a number. Otherwise, it will throw a fit at us. But look at this. If I console log head, it will tell me we are returning 1, 0, and 1. But how about if I do head.value, right? Because this should have a value, technically, since we are at the first node, and this value should be, you guessed it, the number 1. Right? That is the number 1. Look at that. Okay, so what are we doing here, right? We start here. I'm just going to represent this with a star, right? We have a value here, right? And a value here. The value here is 1, the value here is 0, and the value here is 0. But we also have something else to take care of. This dot next. So I'm just going to say n because my handwriting is horrible, right? And it's kind of hard to write with a mouse. Does next exist, right? So when you are at node 1, does next exist? Is there another node to step into, right? There is another node to step into. So we are going to say next is actually going to be next. Right? At node 0, when we are in our second node, is there going to be a node? Oh, I just realized something is off here. This is not 0, but this is 1. Okay? At the next node, when we go from here to here, is there a valid node? There is a valid node, right? So maybe I can copy and paste this. Copy, paste, right? So there is a next value. Perfect. Now, when we are at 1, is there a next value? There is not. So what is that going to be? Undefined. It's not going to be null. Undefined. Right? Because nothing exists here. It's undefined. It's not null. It is like null would mean that there's something there, but it is empty. Undefined means that there is nothing there, right? So this dot next is equal to undefined, return 0. Otherwise, return next, right? Okay, so with that in mind, and the steps broken down, hopefully visually, for you to understand how we are going to approach this, let's start tackling the problem. I will bring this this picture back up, hopefully for you guys to see where we are at when I console log our solution. All right, so back to our problem. I want to show one thing, okay? I want to demonstrate this for you. It is important to note, when I am console logging head here, you are seeing that 1, 0, and 1 looks like an array representation of a list node. And this caught me before, and I hope you know that this, I'm bringing this up to you, will make you aware of it. But when I console log the type of head, right, you will see that it will come back to me as an object. It's not an array. Okay, so that means array methods do not work on this linked list. So we cannot use array methods to tackle this problem. We must use another line of thinking. So let's start by doing that. Because we are going to need to return a binary representation of a value, right? I'm going to need to store all of these numbers, 1, 0, and 1, for this specific example. And in order for me to do that, to return the decimal representation, I am going to use a method that converts strings of binaries to their numerical value representation. And if I know that, I am going to first start off by holding my answers in a string, an empty string specifically. Okay? Now, the next step for me is store the values of each node. Okay? We are going to need to iterate over the linked list and extract the values, right? So, I don't know how long the linked list is. I don't think list.length works because .length is not an object property. It is an array property, and it is a string property. .size might be a map property that you can use for this, but I am unfamiliar, so I am just going to use what I already know. And when do I know that a linked list has ended, right? A linked list has ended when next is undefined, right? When there are no more nodes at the end, that's when I know my linked list has come to an end. And because I don't know how long it's going to be, I'm just going to be using a while loop for this. And I'm just going to say while head does not equal null. And why am I saying null but not undefined, right? Look at this. This dot next is next undefined. It automatically assigns next as null and not undefined. Right, so I'm going to be using this check of null. All right, I want to take the value, since we are already starting, since before I move on to node number 2, before I move into this 0, I want to store the value of 1 in my answer. I'm going to say answer is going to be plus equals head dot val. And why am I using dot val here, this property, right? Because this property doesn't exist anywhere, but it is something created for us by LeetCode, okay? So this will be, you know, the node that we are working on, which is head, right? Head.val, which is the one that we mentioned before from this console log up here. That's number 1, right? So, I have taken in my loop, when I am in this, operating with this node right here, right? I've already taken care of this step. I have placed my answer and I have stored my answer, like the value, in basically my answer string. Now I need to make a check and see, or I just need to tell my program to step into the next node. So I'm going to be, so since head was the full linked list here, I'm going to say head is equal to head.next. Okay? And I'll show you what I mean. I need to console log before I step into the next node. I will console log my head, I will console log the answer, and then at the end, I will console log once I've stepped out of the full list, okay? So I'm going to have a couple of console logs, and because I have a couple of console logs, I'm going to take out this one here on the top, and still return 1, okay? Now look at this. Head, answer, am I missing anything that I want to... All right. We have an output of 1, but we expected 5, so we have an error in our code, but let's take a look here. Because I'm only returning 1, I haven't seen 5 yet. But we're inching closer to the answer. Look at this. When we are on our first iteration, when we are on our first node, right, we have a full list of 1, 0, and 1, which is what we are expecting, right? The value of this node is 1, right? The value of this node is 1. So I am taking 1 and storing it in my answer variable. Then I tell my loop to step into the next node. So now our next node tells me that we are at value 0, but there is still another node after it. Look at this, 0 and 1. And because I'm concatenating a string, you're just going to see the number representation of 10, right? But it's not the number 10, it's the binary value of 10, okay? No, it's the binary representation 1 and 0, not 10. Binary representation of 1 and 0, okay? We've concatenated our answer, we've console logged our answer, but still, you know, we are now in the... I'm not going to use colors like to tell you where we are at because I'm very colorblind and very bad at telling you what colors I'm using, okay? So now when we are on this line 0 and 1 with an answer representing string 1, 0, we are in here, right? We have stored 0 and concatenated it to the old value. We now need to check if there is another node, right? Head is equal to head.next. So head.next is going to be 1. Oops, right? Head.next is going to be 1. We need to extract the value of that node, right? It's going to be 1. So we've added it to the end of the string, right? So now we are at 1, 0, and 1, which is the value, which is the string representation of all of these list nodes, right? We are done this step here, but we still have one more step to go through, which is the next node. But there is no next node, right? The next node doesn't exist. It's undefined. So when the next node is undefined, what do we return? Null. Look at this. Null, right? And so when head does not equal null, we have a valid linked list. But when it is null, we don't. Okay. So now we have the string representation of all of the values in the list node. What do? We need to return the binary representation of this, okay? Because it is binary already, and I don't think that we have to flip the string, because typically when you're reading binary, you read it from right to left. My solution didn't come up with any errors previous to this, so I am just going to not reverse my binary and just use the binary number that is given to me to convert that into its value. Okay. So we know our answer is in the variable answer. It is the representation. It is represented by a string, and I need to return a number, right? So I need to do a few things here, right? I'm going to parse int answer base 2. And that is what I'm going to return. Now you're asking, why am I doing that? Like, why am I returning, parse int? Well, parse int will take a string that is passed through, and depending on the base that you are using, it will then return basically the number representation of the binary, right? So this is how it works in JavaScript. You can parse int to convert your binary representation to the number value, and we know that it is going to be in base 2 because here, sneakily in our explanation, 101 in base 2 is 5, right? So when you take a look at binary, when you're reading from right to left, 1, 0, 1, this number here represents the number 1, and this number represents the number 4. So 1, 0, and 1 represents the number 5. And when we return this, we should see that we get output 5, like we expect. Case 2, output 0, like we expected. I'm going to take away these console logs here, or you know what? I'm just going to do this, and then I'm going to submit this. And if we take a look at that, we solved our solution, right? It's not a great solution. The runtime is a little bit long, and it uses up a little bit of memory, but at least it is an understanding of how to approach linked list problems. So if you learned something here today, please leave a comment on the video below telling me what you thought of the video, what you learned. If you enjoy this new format where I try to solve things outside of the video and then come back and tell you how I solved it and how I explained it. I'm really enjoying this new format. I think it's a little bit smoother. I think it's easier for me. It's easier to roll off the tongue, and it makes things a little bit more clearer. And I have a little bit better sense of direction. I know there's no script here, but when your ideas are formed, it's easier to talk about. So if you like this video, like the video, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment, share it with your friends. Somebody might be able to learn from this. And I look forward to seeing you at the next video.